Good morning, everybody. How are you? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I will wait for the big ballers in the back to finish their conversation. Just kidding.
David Valancourt. Good morning.
It's all Amber's fault. How's everyone doing this morning? Come on, how's everyone doing? Good, good. We all got up and got here. Listen, this is like a murderer's row of panels, so we're going to have some fun today. For those that don't know me, my name is Zach Coburn. I'm a partner at Saul Ewing. I've been fortunate enough to work in the cannabis industry as a lawyer for a decade now. I've been in-house twice, been at a bunch of firms, worked with a ton of regulators and a ton of people. I am super excited to have this amazing group of people in front of me or next to me. And I won't even begin to do them justice. So basically, this panel is a decade in bloom. And our challenge is, let's talk about the last 10 years of cannabis, where we've been, what's worked, what hasn't worked, how we, where do we see things maybe going, and then we'll tee it up for the next panel, talking about the future. I'm going to not do any of them justice, so I'm actually going to let my esteemed panelists and colleagues introduce themselves.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Allison Robinette. I am a DU Law grad, so it's nice to be back in this room where I definitely sat in the back corner. I started my career at the Colorado Attorney General's office, representing the Marijuana Enforcement Division, as well as some of the other enforcement divisions within the Department of Revenue, and also did a short stint practicing water law here in Colorado before coming over as the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at our marijuana and natural medicine divisions.
Hello, good morning. I'm Norman Birnbaum. I am the founding president of the Cannabis Regulators Association. I'm former regulator for the state of Rhode Island, former regulator for the state of New York. Currently have a position within the federal government, but I'm here not with that hat on, so my comments are mine and mine alone. They do not represent any position of the federal government or the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics, or the Food and Drug Administration. So, yeah, happy to be here and not talk about scheduling.
Damn, taking that question off the list.
Hello, I'm Adria Berry. I'm the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority. I am an attorney licensed in Texas and Oklahoma, and was here for the CANRA meeting the past couple of days, and grateful for the opportunity to be here today with you all.
And also, she is now the president of CANRA. Give her a round of applause. Forgot that. We got to add that in your bio.
So when any of you have problems with regulators,
really
you call Adria.
Yeah. Nicole Elliott. I come from the great state of California. Have the pleasure of serving as the director for the California Department of Cannabis Control. Long journey before that. Started in San Francisco. Stood up the San Francisco office of cannabis on the local level as well. Stopped there. Pleasure to be with you guys today.
My name is Michael Miles. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Board. I was in the Navy for 12 years on submarines before I got out and went to school. I'm a practicing attorney, practicing in both California and Nevada. Decided to leave private practice and go to the AG's office for a little work-life balance. Mostly work. Unfortunately, Tyler dragged me over to the Cannabis Compliance Board in 2019, where we stood up the Cannabis Compliance Board during COVID.
Cool. Well, we are super, like I said, super lucky to have this group of people that are probably smarter than all of us combined. But let's just dig right in. Yes, I'm confident. Just remember that when I call. Let's dig right in. So one of the things that we've seen a lot within the cannabis industry as states come online is the difference between a limited license market and a kind of capitalist free market open door. So we've kind of got some interesting experience here with that. I kind of want to get your perspectives on the differences between limited licenses and that free market approach. How has that licensing structure affected your state? What maybe worked, what didn't work? Let's start with the woman of the hour. Let's start with Adria. You've got a unique perspective from Oklahoma.
Yeah, thank you. It is an interesting program, and the way it was set up by state question, the state question was written by citizens of Oklahoma who wanted medical marijuana to be legalized. They wrote it in a way that was very focused on patients having access to medical marijuana. That was their goal. However, the other side of the coin was that they made sure there were no caps on the number of commercial licenses that could be granted, but also no cap on the amount of cannabis that could be grown in our program. So what we saw was a peak of around 12,000 commercial licensees in Oklahoma, which we are a state of about 4 million people, and it's a medical program. So we, at the most, had about 10% of our population with a patient card. So as you can imagine, just doing the basic math, we had an oversupply. So when I started at the OMMA in 2021, the mandate for me was clean it up because there were just so many commercial licensees. We had oversupply. We had kind of opened a door to a criminal element that came from other states that I'm not going to name. Maybe they're up here with me. No, but they're definitely opened a door. So I think free market, great idea. That's a very Oklahoma thing. We love to not have the government too much in our business. However, there definitely need to be, I think the lesson learned is there definitely need to be some controls in place. Production management is ideal if you're going to allow an unlimited number of licenses. At least let's back into making sure we don't create an oversupply. So if we're really talking about lessons learned over the past 10 years, I think that's it. If you want to do a free market, go for it, but just plan ahead and don't create a situation where you're inviting in people that maybe don't have the best interest of the patients that we're serving.
So, Norm, I actually want to look at you because you helped basically prop up two markets that were fundamentally different, right, from the way Oklahoma, started. So I'd love to get your perspective on this kind of limited license versus open market concept.
Yeah, and I don't know how much I helped New York. The infrastructure there was maybe there was a departure from the things that had been worked on between the administrations. But starting with Rhode Island, we had a very, very interesting market there. You had 3 vertically integrated compassion centers within a medical market of a very small state, in a state where 1 out of 20 adults had a medical card in the program with pretty large home-grow plant counts. And because you went from Ogden memo priorities to Cole memo priorities, and they originally were limited to their 99 plant cap. They could not supply such a dense market with their 99 plants internally. So, they're buying overages from home grows, sometimes to the tune of 50, 100, 150 pounds. And I won't comment on whether or not they actually paid those people and threatened to do certain things if they didn't re-up, and there were a lot of price control issues. But basically the question was, how can we put in place a commercialized licensing structure that converts that supply? And so when we created our cultivation license, we basically said, okay, we don't want to oversupply the market. We want to convert all these home grows, which are a huge problem for public health and safety, and consumer safety as well. But we're very weary of competitive licensing processes and litigation challenges. So we created 5 tiers based off of size. We said we're only going to license the 2 smallest to begin, and there's going to be a defined application window. Right, and because we had a defined application window and we're only licensing the 2 smallest size ones, we were pretty, confident that we wouldn't be drastically oversupplying the market based off concerns that we saw from Oregon at the time. And so when we did that, we said to everyone, listen, you only have 3 people you can sell to, okay? A lot of you are going to fail. They may not like you. They may not like your product. And we had issues with the market at that point. But we were able to convert a significant number of those largest home grow co-ops over. The first dozen that were licensed were all those legacy operators, which was very successful. And we were able to get more accountability in place. And we went from, I think it was around 38,000 plants in people's homes that we were aware of down to 18,000 over the course of about a year and a half, 2 years. And then it also served the underlying infrastructure for, the adult use market is about 75 or so of those licenses were issued in the first year and a half. So that was something that, again, constraints with the retailers, but then when the legislature allowed those retailers to open up, again, minimum standards, geographic zoning zones for licenses with lotteries, so that if there were challenges, it would be limited only to those zones, and that was fairly successful as well. With New York, I can't take credit for anything in that state, to be honest.
The mess or the good?
There were things that was worked on to limit the potential for litigation, to make a smooth stand-up of that market, and you can just look at some of the judicial decisions that have been made in rulings talking about that regulatory structure, whether or not it complies with the statute, whether or not they established a foundation under the state's Administrative Procedures Act. It's probably best for me not to comment on it for my mental health and the mental health of all of you, but listen, congratulations on the hours, the billables, for those of you with clients in that state, at least the ones that can pay you. So There you go.
Let's this is where we're gonna, I guess, spin it off the rails a little bit. I kind of want to do a little quick fire. Here's what I want to do. Let's go down the line. Everybody, tell me 2 things that your state did right, and then tell me 2 things your state did wrong with implementing, whether it's adult use or medical, whichever program you want to talk about. But let's talk some horror stories, or war stories, I should say. So let's go to Colorado. Like, what are a couple things that Colorado you think did really right, and what are some things that you think Colorado could have done better?
So I would say in Colorado, we identified early on the need for data collection and reporting for multiple reasons. And one of those is the external reporting, so we could really evaluate the impacts of legalization here, but also for internal enforcement and compliance purposes. We can really evaluate based on our data collection where there are pain points in our whether regulatory enforcement, or if there's lacking clarity in our regulations, which I know never happens. So I think that was one of our strong. It wasn't from the first day, but it was something we adopted really early. The other element I think that we did strike the right balance for was production management. So we have tiers and classes for our cultivation licenses here, and we've really seen a lot of success there. There's ability to move between these tiers once you have your cultivation license based on demand, based on showing that you can move the product out of your facility. And so I think those are 2 of the stronger initial measures that we put into our Colorado framework. As far as what we did wrong or didn't work,
You can't say nothing.
no, I would never. Social equity and equitable access to our market. That is not something that was built into the Colorado framework over 10 years ago because we were so focused on making sure the federal government didn't come and intervene in the first ever adult use regulated market. And so we did not build in equity. We only started that work in 2019 and then built on it in 2020. And our equity program still struggles. And it's something that we are continually evaluating. How can we refine this? What are the legislative changes we need to make? And how can we really right the harms of the war on drugs and disproportionate impact to communities of color and other communities, including minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, to really have a diverse marketplace that reflects the consumers and patients who are accessing it.
Cool. All right, Norm, what about Rhode Island? Tell us a couple things that worked, a couple things that didn't work.
Yeah, really proud of the fact that
better.
Yeah, really proud of the fact that Rhode Island had the first regulatory office with consolidated authority over both hemp-derived and marijuana products. And this was pre-2018 Farm Bill. This was under the 2014 pilot program. And we basically said, listen, we understand the agricultural impacts here in getting our Department of Agriculture's licensing, but these products are going to be, cannabinoid products that people are eating and smoking, and that expertise is over with the medical program. So had that office be a basically a licensing office for those operators, and then consolidated that so there could be alignment pretty early on. So that's something that we're very proud of that I think was done right. And then being as transparent and open as possible with the patient community, particularly as we were trying to address the home grow situation. We required everyone to register their home grow, which was not initially received well. But we talked to them. We said, listen, very, very low cost here, $2.50. Law enforcement will be required to come and check with us first. There will be a record. They will be limited to only checking their jurisdiction. This is your way to demonstrate compliance so that someone is not kicking down your door with their gun drawn, which was commonplace practice. So we were able to get good data on the transition from the home grow informal market over to the regulated market based off of the success of that program. Things that we could have done better, on the this is inside baseball, but on kind of the IT infrastructure, there's a lot of issues with seed to sale and licensing programs. We initially had a thought in terms of how we were going to conduct our licensing and our seed to sale. That was completely wrong. It took us a long time to pivot. I think we see that in a bunch of states. You get entrenched in the operator of the program that you initially award the contract to, and it can be difficult to pivot. So it could have been better there.
Is it hard for states to essentially admit, okay, that was a bad move, let's pivot?
I think there are unique windows of opportunities to make that pivot, and so you might recognize it early on, but then because of contractual obligations or legal considerations, you've got to wait a certain amount of time to then take action. And so that can be very, very frustrating. There's a lot of limiting factors there.
So, go ahead.
I just want to jump in on that. I would say if anyone has ever engaged in the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division rulemaking, you would know we do it every year, all the time. And so we are constantly saying, hey, this didn't work out like we wanted it to, or this is what we're thinking, how can we make it better? So at least in our perspective, we are iterating constantly, and this is with a market that is pretty mature at this point.
Cool. Adrian, what about you? What are a couple things that Oklahoma did right, and what are some things you already touched on one that you think you probably could have improved on, but what are some things you guys did right?
I think when you look at the point of the state question, it was to provide access to cannabis to patients. There is no, to this day, patients can access cannabis and quality cannabis products all across Oklahoma, even in the most rural areas. So access is good. I think that we definitely needed, we set up, we were put in a position where we didn't have staff. We didn't have seed to sale for 4 years, the first 4 years of the program. So there were a lot of things that we could have done better. And to the question about, is it hard for government to pivot? It's difficult in the logistics, like Norm said. However, like Allison said, when you work in cannabis, you have to be able and willing to pivot constantly and change your rules and work with stakeholders. If the rules aren't working, change them. Within statutory authority, of course, which is usually the issue there, which is where, we need help from people like you guys to help work with the legislature on what the laws should look like so that we have a good framework. A lot of times when we want to change, the statute doesn't allow us to. So I would say in Oklahoma, there are a lot of lessons to learn. I'd be happy to talk to anyone that's interested.
Let's get the OG on the panel on that.
So I would say first and foremost, the creation of the department within the state of California was a really big win. I think it's really helped. I'm seeing some nods, so thank you for affirming.
You guys were extremely fractured. I mean, it was like
it was 3 programs
yeah.
across 3 agencies, different languages. I mean, you guys lived it. So doing that, I think, has made measurable improvement to the way the state's implementing Prop 64 and MRCRSA. So that's one thing. I'd also say, and this is post a couple days of CANRA, as we're talking about issues facing our markets, facing our businesses, facing our organizations. The tax fund in general was really well thought out. So where that money from legal cannabis is invested in California, I think there was mostly good thought given to that. The one thing on that note that I don't think was done well, which we're trying to rectify this year in budget negotiations, is having the tax fund pay for the enforcement of the department for illegal cannabis activity, so that is not a cost shouldered by our licensees, since we are a fee-funded department. That's a really big one, and it's a significant portion of our budget, as well as track and trace, I'll add. And one other thing I think that there's a lot of opportunity for improvement is the department, by nature of it being a discretionary license that we issue, duplicates a lot of work of local government. And that's just a calcification of government that's really unhealthy. So I think removing those requirements, which has to be a statutory exercise, would be beneficial for our continued goal of streamlining licensing.
Do you think that's the type of thing where it should be like other states where it's less? Like in California, for years, we all know, like the local government, can make or break a license, right? And that's where a lot of the hurdles and the roadblocks tend to be, is with the local governments. Do you think California should move to a model like other states where it's a state-run program, state-run licenses, and the locals have much less control.
You're asking me if we should get rid of local control in the state of California?
I was trying to be
Nice
delicate
try.
about the way I asked the
Nice
question.
try.
On the record, Nicole.
This is off the record. We're all going to be quiet.
So aside, I don't think that's feasible. Candidly, it's just not feasible
Right.
in the state of California. But there are things that we can do that make those dual processes a lot more simple, quick, easy for licensees, easy for government. So
Good.
without losing the overall objective of the exercise.
But that's good. I mean, like, to me, that's a good thing to think about, right? Like, is how do you work together as opposed to, I think some other states are very much like, my way, my way. So I like that that's a good approach. Michael, what about you? What about Nevada?
I think our initial medical program rolled out in 2013. I think they did a really good job at taking their time, getting the regs right, getting the application process right. Everything rolled out relatively smoothly and worked out smooth right up until after they did the one-to-ones into adult use. Then they did the licensing round for the dispensaries of adult use, and it kind of went off the rails at that point. Again, as many of you know, we used the ranking system back then in 2017, 18. And we ended up in something called World War Weed in 2019, 2020. But we got ourselves out of it. That's one of the things that caused the creation of the CCB. And that was another one of the good ones. We took our time, we organized, me and Tyler in the back corner, created it and organized the CCB to run smoothly. Same thing with our consumption lounge program. We got that up and running smoothly. It's running a little slow right now, but we'll see what happens. Also, I think one of the really good things we do that's clear to a lot of states is we have registered environmental health specialists in our inspection team. Every one of our inspection team is a registered environmental health specialist. So we have a very education-based program when it comes to working with our licensees. And they can call us for anything, and we can call them as well.
Do you find there was pushback from licensees thinking the regulators are, why are you telling me about a spill on the floor in the bathroom when you should be talking to me about cannabis regulation? Like, do you find there's pushback in that aspect?
There is, but again, most understand they deal with food safety products.
Right.
So they have to fall under those same standards that restaurants fall under. So again, we do get occasional pushback. Mostly it's how to construct some of the facilities, but when we get it running, it goes well.
Cool. So Allison mentioned something, and it was kind of on our list of things to talk about, and I have my own personal feelings, but let's open it up to the whole panel. Has social equity worked?
What's your definition of social equity? No, seriously, like that's really important. You need
that's
metrics.
actually the first question, right?
Yeah,
it's go.
I do want to compliment a couple things about New York. Also, like the intentions there, if that is your policy goal, are wonderful, right? But it's a question of what is practical. What's government good at, right? Is government, is there a strong track record of market architecture or manipulation towards certain stakeholders, if that's your definition, right? If your definition is licensure and market share, that's different than just licensure, and that is different in year 1 than it is in year 3 than it is in years 5 or 10, right? If your definition is around expungement or vacature of past, criminal convictions for justice-involved individuals, and the barriers to that and how easy it is or automatic, that's another goal. If your goal is community reinvestment, right? That's also separate. And what are you doing with that community reinvestment? Is it only going towards participation in this industry, which has significant regulatory complexities, burdens, and constantly shifting, or is it going to go towards things that are, food stability, early childhood education, stability for housing, things that are, agnostic that communities need aside from just participating in one specific market. So that's your data collection and what your priorities are going to dictate whether or not you've been successful in certain states.
Yeah, and I would say from Colorado's perspective, the intention in 2019 with the initial social equity program legislation was really focused on increasing diversity of owners in our commercial program. And so when you're just focused on getting people in the door, there was not enough focus both through legislation and implementation on how do we make sure that these people are set up for success. That includes investment, that includes education, technical assistance in ways beyond running a cannabis business. It's running a business. It's working with HR specialist. And so over time with the Cannabis Business Office here in Colorado, that's served that purpose. They are there to provide technical assistance. They provide grants and loans. They help people learn how to write a business plan. That was not part of the initial implementation. And so in a lot of ways, our early implementation of our equity program was just focused on getting people in the door and then letting them kind of flounder for a while, especially in a mature market where there were existing licensees and there was a lot of market saturation already.
Yeah, I'll say so. For California, obviously from the decrim side, sort of setting the stage for future states to come on how to approach that, lessons learned as well. Going back to the tax fund, there's a lot of money that gets reinvested back into communities, whether that be the reinvestment, community reinvestment grant, or even I call it the Tier 3 funding, which goes back into youth services, for instance. So from that side, great things. I want to say, don't quote me on this, but hundreds of thousands of expungements have been completed in the state of California. California did sort of appropriately course correct and put more of the burden of that exercise on the government, which was great to see, a lesson learned that we've communicated to other states as well. And then as it relates to, equity in cannabis, having come from San Francisco and working on standing up that program there, in partnership with a couple of people in this room, it takes an enormous amount of time, energy, resources, focus to really have meaningful implementation of that. At scale in the state of California, much harder to do. So I applaud our local jurisdictions that have done it. I want to say, I have to go back and look, but we at one point had a quarter of our business licenses identified either through the state definition or local definition as equity operators in the state of California. So not a ton, but not a small amount. So we were seeing some good success on that end. And then, of course, we had a fee waiver program, which was just direct capital at the end of the day back into the pockets of licensees. That was funded at $30 million one time. It is no longer funded, but a program that we would love to see be backfilled so that we can support licensees maintaining access to that fund.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the Nevada's weaknesses is the social equity program. Again, we were one of the older programs too. It was not one of the things that was really considered early on. In 2021, they passed the laws for allowing cannabis consumption lounges, and they set aside 10 of those independent licenses specifically for social equity licensees. We spent about a year and a half on a dozen or more workshops crafting who would qualify, and we went through. We ended up with 10, and only one so far has made it past our suitability checks, and they will. The only reason they're not getting to that point is because we have a limit of, you have to show you have 200,000 in assets to continue on in our suitability check, and obviously it's set up so basically the social economics came from the lower income bracket. So it's taken them, it's a challenge. They're trying to find investments again.
That's 22.
Yeah, it's brutal. And it leads into one of your other things like the initiative program. Our initiative process sent all the money to the schools. So our school program. So it's really hard to take some of that away and put it towards social equity or towards the research programs.
Right.
So,
What about Oklahoma?
it's a work in process.
All right, I think I'm the only red state up here. So we are a very red state. Okay, you too. Okay. So it's interesting if you've worked with government very much, it's just about the way you say things and the words you use. But we, the people who wrote our state question created the most opportunity for social equity without calling it that. So we, at one point, I don't know if it's still true, but as of last year, we had the most minority business licensees of any state because we had such a open program. licensure was not and is not super difficult to attain in Oklahoma. So commercial licensure. So we do have a lot of minority business owners, but to Allison's point, there's been no contemplation by our legislature or interest by our legislature, and I'm not throwing them under the bus, it's just I'm in a red state, to invest in making sure that their business is actually healthy after they're licensed. So that's often the difficult part, because there are a lot of people who have never owned a business before. They have the license, but they've never actually run a business before. And then we're the government, so we're not really there to tell them how to run their business. So we've had a quite an equitable program without it ever being intended to be equitable. And, you know, the current political environment, we don't even talk about DEI in Oklahoma. So it's just interesting to see the actual statistics. It has led to something that other states have really put a lot of thought into, and ours, we just kind of backed into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not working in public service, so I have no problem talking about how Florida screwed this one up. So, you know, but no, it's a very interesting how the politics, I think, of the state and the legislatures play into what you can and can't do, and the dynamic. You know, I think that the political ideology in the tenor in California is obviously different than, say, Oklahoma or Florida. You know, and yeah, what can we do with that?
And I mean, also the impact of federal framing and guidance over time, right? Early days post-Cole memo, you know, very broad definition of what constitutes organized crime. You know, someone with a prior cannabis or marijuana conviction in a couple of years right after the Cole memo was issued, where, you know, you still have, you know, DOJ, DEA raids on medical operators in states and things like that. You know, the notion that someone having a prior conviction for violating the Controlled Substances Act with marijuana or cannabis would then bump them up in licensing and not automatically be disqualified. You know, the thought there was, we have to disqualify those people for the integrity of the entire market and whatever other goals you have there, whether they're based on, you know, economic development or decriminalization and, you know, other ways that you might define, you know, criminal justice reforms, right? So
it's almost like you knew what my next question was going to be.
I didn't read the outline ahead of time, so I assure you I didn't.
But no, okay, so that actually opens up a really interesting conversation when it comes to the federal government's approach towards state legalized cannabis, right? So we all know the Cole memo, you know, we're now a decade past the Cole memo. But I'd love to know, you know, how has, in your all's opinion, how has the federal government's approach towards state legalization changed? Has it not changed? What are your thoughts on that? Let's start with Michael.
In Nevada, actually, we haven't seen any changes whatsoever. Again, Norm's going to be the one to answer this question in more detail, unfortunately. Again, when they got rid of the Cole memo, we were just kind of flying by the seat of your pants on how to handle things.
Yeah.
When they talked about rescheduling it, we got excited. We created a lot of plans, but again, all that has been on hold for quite a while now as well. So we're just waiting on to see what the feds are going to do.
All right, keep it. Go ahead.
Putting aside the last 6 months in California, the biggest impact the federal government has had on California's state program, and probably many others, is the Farm Bill. And any inaction that has come post-2018 Farm Bill. That is the most impactful thing for California's cannabis market at this point.
Yeah.
I'll let Norm go next. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
We
Well, I
can
feel like
avoid
that
the
was teed
rescheduling
up.
Conversation.
It was kind of teed up for Norm. And no, we don't. I have no idea what the federal government is or isn't doing at any time. No offense, but there are times we definitely need help. In Oklahoma, we could use some maybe like law enforcement help sometimes, and they're not necessarily there. So it would be helpful to have some of that. But I agree with Nicole that the Farm Bill definitely impacted every program that was set up to legalize marijuana. The marijuana side of cannabis, with the opening of the intoxicating hemp drive market, just kind of, you know, poking and asking questions to the federal government and Congress saying, hey, what are you guys Are y'all going to help us on this, or is this another piecemeal state by state, which we've seen it is piecemeal state by state, which, I just don't really think that that's the best long-term strategy.
So we're going to deliberately avoid scheduling because, well, we want to talk about how we got here. But I want to stay in the federal government for a second, but then I want to come back to hemp. So I guess we'll come to you, Norma. On the federal government side, how have we seen, and what kind of changes have we seen when it comes to, public health, research, things like that, not away from the big, sexy rescheduling things, but the stuff that could really have an impact down the line. Have we seen the kind of changes at the federal government, and what are they?
Yeah, I mean, the landscape has been very, very challenging for public health, both in terms of messaging, in terms of data collection, and for consumer awareness, right? And if you don't have consumer awareness, you cannot collect good data, right? So, early on with state legalization programs, the question was, how can you get baseline data? How can you get data about consumer use trends? How can you get data around cannabis use disorder, adverse events, things that you should be using to inform your regulatory structure when it comes to the product standards? And if you're paying for that collection method based off of revenue that comes after the market launches, you have lost your baseline data, let alone the defunding of those initiatives afterwards, because legislatures like to go in and kind of raid the bank account. So it's been very, very problematic before we had the hemp overlay issue, which further confounds things, especially the last 18 months. We've seen on the intoxicating hemp side of things, it used to be Delta 8, Delta 8, Delta 8, Delta 8 THC. Now, if you pair THCA with Delta 9 THC, it's about 75% of the intoxicating hemp market. And this is a market that, various estimates say are down the same size or larger than all state regulated programs combined, right? Because of their economies of scale, because of interstate commerce, consolidated manufacturing, their retail distribution, lack of tax obligations and liabilities, everything that traditional state regulated cannabis has been fighting for gets handed over, right? Not to mention the marketing aspect. So now trying to collect that data and inform consumers, is it Delta 8? Is it Delta 8 or is it Delta 9? If you ask about hemp-derived Delta 9, we have to ask questions like, where did you get it from? Right. Did it come from a gas station? Did it come from a corner store? Did you buy it online and did it go through the mail? We can't necessarily say, is this a state-regulated cannabis product to understand? And you see the explosion of these really alarming product categories with amounts of THC in products that are inherently attractive to children that would never be allowed in adult use markets, and tons of misinformation from people who are profiting off of this.
So is a lot of that also because, and this kind of, I guess, gets to the hemp side too, and full transparency, I do a ton of hemp work.
Who's not doing hemp work in this room right now? Everyone's hedging, right?
Right.
So,
but I guess so to the hemp side, right? Is this? I tell this to a lot of people. I love your opinion. That I've always felt that when it comes to the hemp side, this is a perfect example of how science and technology were so far ahead of policy. When the Farm Bill was passed in 2018, I don't think any of the policymakers anticipated, wait a minute, somebody's literally going to be able to convert hemp CBD into Delta 9, and that's going to end up being legal. Is it just the fact that policymakers weren't thinking that far ahead in advance, weren't talking to the right people, that we got to this point where we've got this, for lack of a better word, loophole? Or is there something else there that kind of proliferated the idea that, we've got a hemp market, we've got a regulated THC, regulated cannabis market? Anybody?
I don't want to, I have things to say, but.
So I can speak for the experience in California, which was, if you look at the way the framework was constructed in AB 45, you can see that there was a hedge. There was a hedge that something could happen with compounds. And that's exactly why you saw emergency regulations slapped down last fall, because that was the governor and the executive branch pulling the trigger on that hedge. There was a conversation in the state of California that it was going to be CBD. It was not. It did not turn into CBD only. And so that's the consequence of the outcomes of those discussions. I don't know, Norm, if that's why you were looking at me, but that's how it played out in California, and here we are today. No intoxicating compounds in the general commercial market.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, that should be the case.
And I would say from Colorado's perspective, our marijuana sciences team in our division has been talking about Delta-8 and other cannabinoids since 2018, 2019. It wasn't really until 2022, 2023 when we held hundreds of hours of intoxicating hemp task force meetings that were so granular. They were getting down to the detail of which compounds are inherently intoxicating, which ones are inherently non-intoxicating, which combinations can you put together. And that task force ultimately landed with recommendations that informed our bill, Senate Bill 23-271 here in Colorado, that really put agencies in their lanes. In Colorado, our constitutional amendment says we are, as the Marijuana Enforcement Division, not allowed to regulate hemp and hemp products. And so our partners at the Department of Public Health and Environment and the Department of Agriculture, really, we all had to come together with groups of stakeholders from both the hemp industry, from the hemp product and manufacturing industry, and the marijuana industry to have these hard conversations that ultimately informed where our law landed, which for those of you who don't know, in Colorado, there are maximum milligram limits on hemp products that are considered compliant and may be sold in the state, and anything that doesn't fit within that definition can be manufactured here but cannot be sold here. And so, it has created a really tricky enforcement situation, especially with online sales, and consumer protection concerns when we see products that wouldn't otherwise be legal in the state of Colorado being sold here.
Zach, can I keep it real with you for a second?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
No one else is here. It's just you and me.
Okay. Listen, yes. This industry that we are all working with is incredibly innovative. And yes, they get ahead of the government. And that's what I believe would happen. Now, were there people that knew this was going to happen? I think that's a conversation for a different, room. But
over a few drinks.
I think that we see it time and again when we're making regulations, when we're writing rules. It's with the mindset that we're working with a really innovative industry. And so these rules might be okay for now, but they're going to figure out a way to get ahead of them. And so we're constantly thinking that way.
Anyone who thinks that this was the intent of the 2018 Farm Bill, find me afterwards. We'll argue. You're wrong. You can look at internet search history for Delta-8 THC going back from 2000 to about 2018. It is completely flat, right? Outside of peer-reviewed publications on scientific analysis of the cannabinoids that are produced, mostly coming out of Israel, this was not a known quantity. It's like saying that the original Tobacco Control Act deliberately did not want to regulate nicotine vapes, And then they were, regulation needs to evolve. Should there have been knowledge about this? Before CANRA was CANRA, we were the regulators roundtable. We would meet every 6 months. I had a licensee in Rhode Island, mad scientist Mike, I would call him, and he came to me back in 2016 and said, I can convert CBD to Delta-9. It's possible I can do it. Can I do this? I'll buy my CBD from under the pilot program. It'll be so much cheaper. I want to do this. Can I do this? And the answer was no, absolutely not. Not only does it not meet the legal definition of marijuana, but also you're undercutting the supply chain we put in place in this state. We're licensing people who are cultivating at great cost indoors in the Northeast. So no, for a bunch of reasons. And then every time we would meet at CANRA, I would ask people, are you seeing this? Are you seeing this? And the answer was no, no, no for the next 2.5, 3 years until we all met at the beginning of 2019 in Maryland, and we asked the room, with 30 plus regulators in it, are you seeing this? And 5 hands shot up, right? So I don't think that this was the intent. It wasn't broadly known. I don't think it was brought to anyone's attention. And certainly the ability to, bring to market these cannabinoids that are not naturally occurring or capable of being produced in the plant where there's no history of human use or interaction, right? We're running a science experiment right now on folks, mostly through inhalation products, right? Which, let's just look back to Evolve and how it conserves there. So I really, I'll also just say, listen, your clients that say hemp and all hemp derivatives are federally legal, no. They're federally decontrolled and unscheduled. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act still applies. They didn't have to reiterate that in the Farm Bill, but they did anyways. And again, that'll be one of the things we argue about in the hallway afterwards.
But I guess taking that a step further, are hemp conversions a bad thing? You look at states like Maryland or Minnesota, which, recognize there may be a shortage of biomass and will allow hemp conversions, right? Is it a bad thing for a processor in any of your states to come up and say, I can't buy flower, but I can get CBD cheaper and I can get more product to market?
We've got plenty of flour for you guys in
I
Oklahoma.
was just going to say, we can help you. We can help you with that problem.
What are you converting it into? What's the methodology, right? There's a really strong policy argument to say, listen, if the molecule is coming from the plant, or it's coming from yeast and fermentation, or it's being, synthesized another way, and your end result is the same molecule, and you're not dealing with contaminants or, other types of issues that elevate the harm profile. Okay, the molecule's the molecule. Right. Why differentiate between? But when you're talking about these molecules that aren't the things that are naturally occurring in the plant, which there's thousands of history of use, even in de minimis amounts. I mean, that's a very different situation, especially with how innovative the industry is, and they're combining things with alcohol, with tobacco, with caffeine.
Isn't a lot of this also like, so in 2019 I was in Israel, and someone over there made a really good point that that in Israel they maximized research and development and couldn't figure out commercialization. In the United States was the exact opposite. We skipped R&D and went straight to commercialization. And you look at the typical pharma model where it's like, okay, identify an issue, an illness. Now identify an enzyme, a protein, some compound. And will that specific enzyme, protein, compound help that specific issue or illness? So it's not like we've said with cannabis, okay, identify one cannabinoid and how will it fix this? We just said, here's a whole plant and here's a whole bunch of cannabinoids. Is this because the United States created this market naturally where we skipped R&D and we went straight to one plant, let's just figure out a way to enjoy it?
I'm looking at the FDA right now. It's a great point.
What is the policy goal? What is the policy goal, right? Generally speaking, from a state regulatory perspective, the policy goals has been regulatory certainty, okay? Whether that's around the consumer protection aspects for the consumer, so they can be certain of consistency in dose and safety profile, regulatory certainty for the operators, so they know how to deploy their capital, right? But certainty around what that safety profile is not the same as saying it is safe, but maybe it is safer. But safer than what? So typically this is safer than what's available on the illicit market, right? And it's consistent. But you're talking now about compounds for which there's no benchmark to make safer than. Right. We don't know what that is. So
it makes sense. Yeah. All right. So we have time for one more question. I'm going to ask everybody, and then if we have a couple minutes, we'll open it up to the group. So, besides your state, and if you can, besides the other states that are up here, what states are doing it right, or what are some things that other states are doing that you think they're doing right? We'll start with Michael, and we'll put you in the hot seat.
Personally, I liked how Florida did everything completely set up vertically. That's just the supply chain process.
Boy, we screwed that up.
That I appreciate, because it's a lot more difficult when you have independent cultivators, and you also have dispensaries that own cultivators and production, and you have independent production. It makes it really difficult. You get a lot of cultivators and a lot of production companies that aren't getting paid by the dispensaries.
We also have no wholesale and the most costly.
I'm not saying you're perfect.
operator.
I'm saying I liked the vertically integrated setup. The required vertically integrated setup. It needs to be one way or the other.
I joke with people about Florida. It's the only state where if you 300,000 square feet of canopy, you're just average. But okay, so listen. In theory, vertical I think works. Like it could work and it makes sense. So,
or the other way.
Yeah.
You don't allow vertical.
Or the other way. Yeah. Okay. What about you, Nicole?
Yeah, I don't think any state's done it right, honestly.
That's okay. That's a good answer.
But I do want to say that there are components of state work, some of their, for instance, some of their lab work, their enforcement work, their investigative work that thanks to CANRA, We have a great network to be able to tap in and pull that knowledge, as well as share out our knowledge into that space so that we're not recreating the wheel in every single state.
So let's call them out. What are some of those states that have those aspects that you like?
So Maryland has a great lab director. Sorry. She's excellent. She's so good at, for the regulators in the room, some of that lab work is so technical, and she is so good at translating up and down the work that needs to occur, the trends in this space, some of the health harms in this space. She's just really brilliant. Michigan has some really great investigative capabilities. I'm not allowed to talk about states on this panel. Sorry. Sorry, Adria.
To talk about how great.
I know, because Oklahoma does too. But really good. We've tapped into Nevada's expertise as well in California. So, there's just an endless amount of stuff that we've learned from other states.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree that the
Aside
reason
from
we
Maryland.
she took mine. No, the reason we even know any of this is really because of Canra, because we all talk to each other now.
Right.
And we talk often, and we have resources, we have committees, we meet together. So I definitely was going to shout out Maryland's lab, because we're building our own reference lab. We're almost open, but we talk to Maryland constantly. But I will throw out another one that's not up here, Michigan. You mentioned Michigan's investigative. I'm glad you didn't steal my second one. But the thing I was going to say is they do really good outreach. They do these continuous education call outs basically to their industry, to patients. They are like an open book. And so I have my team looking at how they do that to make sure that we're engaging and talking to our industry.
That's a really good point. There's a lot of states I deal with where the regulators are just, they don't want to talk to anybody unless there's a problem. And to me, that's not effective use. So I love that comment. Norm, what about you? What are a couple states, or what's some things that other states are doing that you think they're doing it right?
There have been some really important lessons that I've learned when I was trying to craft policy. A lot of them out of California, and the transparency of what was going on there. I don't know that it's because they were doing things right. I think it's because they said, listen, we have issues here, and please don't make the same mistakes we did. And we were able to communicate that through Canra. And one of the big examples there is with delivery, right? You had 3 years of litigation over municipal control over delivery or not. And delivery can be the great equalizer when you think about how it's structured. So we were very intentional on how we wrote the law in New York around municipalities not being able to opt out of delivery. And whether you think that's the right policy or not, it was written clearly so we weren't stymied by 3.5 years of litigation, right? Similar evolution on the tax basis, right? You go from weight-based taxes and then learning from Nevada and all the different types of criteria that you have in market evaluations, and what are we getting at here? What's the real? It's the THC content. And so then you have New York and Connecticut with a THC-based tax, and seeing what happened in Illinois with various brackets, and that was great innovation. And then it kind of went one step further. I'm looking at Pat Oglesby here, who's, for those who don't know, the premier cannabis tax mind in the country. So go talk to him about cannabis taxes, please. He'll talk to you about the 3,000-page book from the old British Empire when they used to tax it in India.
I might get some clients.
I know, but yeah, there are so.
You learn from the mistakes.
You learn from the mistakes, and then you see a whole wave of states implementing the corrections at the same time together because of that communication.
Yeah.
Right? So it's hard to. I don't want to single out one state that says, "Oh, we fixed this," because it comes from the state who communicated and said, "Hey, this was wrong." Whether it was our fault or not, might have been the legislators, might have been the voters, might have been some of the people in here that wrote the ballot initiative. So, it's. That is the process that we've seen.
What about you, Allison? What are some things you're seeing in other states that are being done that they're doing right?
Yeah, well, I just want to say ditto to everyone else's answers and focus. I think, one, to kind of bring it back to where I started, when it comes to the equity provisions, we're really feeling inspired by some of the states that are really investing a lot of money into their equity programs, and that includes New Jersey and Maryland. And we're all trying to be creative in this space because, like we talked about, when you have mature, saturated markets, how do you really make impact in the equity space? And so we are constantly learning and looking to those other states that are trying new and different things to see, okay, what can we incorporate into our program? What does that look like for Colorado? And then the other one that I wanted to shout out is environmental measures and sustainability measures, because I think that there's this idea that the cannabis space is full of environmentally minded folks, but at the end of the day, these are businesses that are also trying to make money. And I like to see some of the initiatives coming out of Vermont that are really focused on how can we address, waste through plastic packaging? How can we address some of these other issues in the environmental space, which is not unique to the cannabis industry? That's something that I think as a whole world, we are trying to really mitigate our plastic waste.
Shout out Vermont. Thank you all, please. I really appreciate it. We've got maybe like 2 minutes. So before we end, we'll probably take 2 questions. I think we've got time for maybe 2 or 3 questions, and that's it. We'll go right here first.
Thank you. I like your point about that you all are sort of constrained by the statutes. And
Don't ask about litigation, by the way.
I'm not asking about litigation. But we, as an industry, we haven't been terribly successful to get our state legislatures or the federal governments, both the legislatures and the regulators, to enforce things or to fix the many problems that we have. What are we doing wrong, short of, this is half cynical, buying every legislator their own plates? Like, what are we doing wrong to not get the states to fix the problems that we all know and keep shouting about? And this is not an attack on you all as regulators, it's the legislators who are not fixing.
The question is, how do we better communicate the issues that legislators need to see? Any thoughts from the panel?
Just really quickly, I'd just say that if you're framing it as what are we doing wrong, I don't think you're doing it wrong. It's still a very young industry, and that's from me perspective. In Oklahoma, they're getting calls from the oil and gas industry and industries that have been around forever, alcohol industry, and so they just have building those relationships, and it takes time, and you have to build those relationships and make them care. I guess make them see your point of view.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are inundated with a million of the world's problems, right? So I do think that in California, one of the things that I've seen be really effective with legislators in moving them, really in grabbing their attention and forcing them to sit there, listen, understand the issue, are their constituents, their businesses, their elected officials. It's not necessarily the associations at all times. It's the people they report to. So I know it's kind of cliche, but it's true. You got to be in their office, in their ear, and be invested in their district as well.
The same point, industry always isn't on the same page. It doesn't know what they want when they go talk to the legislature. They all have conflicting opinions on what they want to see done.
You mean the cannabis industry is not all on the same page?
I mean, take California, for instance. There's a tax reform bill moving through the legislature right now. Bipartisan, unanimous support. It is the #1 issue of the industry this year. They've rallied behind it. They've set other things aside, and they're making progress.
Yeah.
So.
Allison, you were going to say something, then we'll get one more question after that.
I was going to say, and work with your regulator. If you have early conversations with your regulators about what is feasible for them to implement, it's going to make it a much smoother legislative process when they can go and say, this is how we're going to implement this policy change, should you all choose to adopt it. The other thing I'll say is go talk to Jordan Wellington in the corner.
Can you tell the other regulators to work with the stakeholders in Florida?
So just very quickly, market over margin. If the focus is what's best for the market as opposed to the individual operator's margins, things would be a lot more ripe for consensus. One of the things that we have seen, and that's why there's fragmentation among a lot of stakeholders within one jurisdiction, but for those that are looking for uniformity across states, you do one thing in one state and you say, well, we didn't like these 5 things that happened, so let's try to change those in the next state, and maybe you're successful, maybe you're not, and that continues and continues, and now you've got this patchwork. If you said, we didn't like this, but if we had this, and something that closely resembled this in a lot of jurisdictions, people's lives would be a lot easier, and then reform would be a lot easier because you'd have consensus about what's working and not. The hemp industry right now is going through this the same way that cannabis did early days when it was ballot initiative after ballot initiative after ballot initiative.
Interesting that the hemp industry is organizing much better.
I would disagree.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I see it in the states I'm working in, and it's like
I
insane.
think they're really loud national voices, but there isn't a war between hemp and marijuana. That is the worst operators in hemp passing the buck onto marijuana because hemp doesn't want to, because they have internal conflicts.
Yeah. Okay. One more question, then we'll finish. So you had your hand from the back.
Yeah. On the social equity point, there's been a long history of relatively successful race-neutral support of subcontractors in the government contracting area, which would seem to provide a model for what you've been talking about as supporting. Has that been adopted in any of your states? Are you thinking about that?
Actually tried that in Nevada with the consumption lounges and was shot down almost immediately by our DAGs. The problem with the construction industry in that, which I worked with, and I actually did work in that sphere a decade ago, there is a long history of discrimination against those type of contractors. And they do a full study of that like every so many years, so they have a lot of evidence sitting there. So we need to get it, and these are like decades old, so our industry is way too new to be able to do that type of, at least that's how it was explained to me, and it sounded right.
MWBE specifically is referenced in the MRTA in New York. It's one of the licensing criteria that can give you prioritization. So yes, it doesn't have exclusive prioritization there. There's a lot, but I mean, there are references there.
But what I'm asking, maybe I wasn't clear enough. These are race-neutral support programs. So you're not looking about being a minority business or a women-owned business. What you're looking at are income levels, capital available.
Maryland. Maryland, I think, is the best example that's done.
I mean, California has a ton of local programs built that way, a la carte. As a matter of fact, in the Equity Act, it asks local programs to assess their populations against impacts of the war on drugs on those populations and build a program that meets those populations' need. Humboldt looks very different than San Francisco. Looks very different than LA.
Yeah, and I think the thing to that point, and we'll finish on this, is that what works in Florida may not work in Oregon, may not work in Arizona, may not work in Massachusetts or Oklahoma or any of these great states. I think everyone's a little different. I want to thank this amazing panel for giving us their time and talking really candid. I really appreciate it from everybody. David, you want to take a break? Are we taking a break, or you want to go right through it?